What does militant atheism have to do with what's going on in America right now? We're going to try to answer that question for you today. We have a very important guest to talk about that. Before we welcome on the guest, just want to ask you, like this video, share it out with your friends, your family, your neighbors. Also, head on over to rwatch.com. Love to have you subscribe, become one of our watchmen. Very important that you have a place where you know you can go to get real, true, correct information. And you know, social media is always trying to shut us down whenever we speak truth. So important that you head on over to our watch, subscribe, become one of our watchmen. We really thank you for that. All right, to talk to us about this question of what does militant atheism have to do with what's going on in America today, we have a great guest. Evan Sayet is with us today. He is a profound author. Mr. Sayet, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you really, it is an honor to have you on today. You gave a speech in 2007 at the Heritage Club. Andrew Breitbart called this and this is a quote, he says it is one of the 5 most important conservative speeches ever given, and it remains today, some 17 years later, by far the most viewed lecture in the Heritage Foundation history, with well over 3 million views. Tell us, if you would, about the content of that speech.
Oh, well, it became known as the unified field theory of leftism, in that I very quickly and very satisfactorily to obviously very, very many people explained why it is that so many good, smart, decent, loving, generous people, you know, like our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues, even some of our family members. I'm talking about the people who vote Democrat, and even more than that, actively side with the political left, will reject fact and reason and invariably side with evil over good, wrong over right, ugly over beautiful, profane over profound, and failure over success. And again, I did it in a way because obviously people are always trying to explain how the political left, and by the way, how the political right think. But I was able to do it in a way that was so satisfying to so many that the talk just became legendary.
So you say the unified field theory of leftism. What do you mean by that?
Well, I can explain to you why it is in the book that followed, The Kindergarten of Eden, How the Modern Liberal Thinks. I actually laid out 4 laws and 3 corollaries that will explain to you why good, smart, decent people reject fact and reason and side. I mean, how do you look at the Middle East and side with Hamas? You know, how do you look at what went down in Ferguson, Missouri, or, you know, and decide that Michael Brown was the victim and Officer Darren Wilson was an evil white racist cop? I mean, how do you look at the facts and get it not only wrong, but diametrically opposed to the truth? And if you like, I can give you the first 2 laws of my unified field theory of leftism, and it should suffice.
Yes, please. Is that what yeah, please. Okay,
I'm going to give it to you first how it's written in the book, The Kindergarten of Eden, and then I'll explain. So the first law is that the modern liberal, the leftists, the woke, they've been raised to believe that indiscriminateness is a moral imperative because its opposite is discrimination. All right, let me explain. Starting in the 1980s, by no coincidence, when the first babies born after World War II, who became the children of the 60s, when in the 80s they began to become the powers that be in academia, in journalism, in Democratic Party politics, in entertainment. In the 1980s, thinking was outlawed. It was deemed to be a hate crime. Right? The thinking behind this is that anything that you believe, anything that I believe, anything that anybody believes is going to be so tainted by your personal prejudices. Right? Prejudices we all have, prejudices we can't help but have. Prejudices based on such things as the color of your skin, the nation of your ancestry, your height, your weight, your sex, and so on. Anything that you believe is going to be so tainted by your personal bigotries that the only way not to be a bigot is to never think at all. Right now, that's the first law of the unified field theory of leftism, but it's not enough, because if it's true that the political left doesn't embrace fact and reason to only then come to their conclusion, you would expect for them, if they are indiscriminate, you'd expect for them to sometimes be right, sometimes be wrong, and sometimes be somewhere in the middle. But the reality is the political left is always not just wrong, They are always as wrong can be, diametrically opposed to all that is good, right, true, beautiful, and successful. And that's because the second law of the unified field theory of leftism, and again, I'm going to give it to you as it's written in the book and then explain, but it's that indiscriminateness of thought does not lead to indiscriminateness of beliefs. Indiscriminateness of thought leads invariably and inevitably to siding with evil, failure, and wrong. Why? Because if nothing, if no government, if no religion, if no familial construct, if no behavior, if nothing is better than anything else, success just by its existence is proof positive that somehow there's an injustice. Why should something succeed if it's not better than something else? Conversely, failure, as proved by nothing other than the fact that it has failed, serves as proof positive that somehow the failure has been victimized. Why should a person, a nation, a culture, a religion, why should something fail if it's not worse than anything else? And then just by extension, if success and failure is unjust, then great success and great failure is proof positive of great injustice. And ultimately, exceptional success and exceptional failure is proof positive of the greatest injustices of all. So if you look, for example, at the political left embracing Hamas and despising Israel, it's not because the Israelis have done anything bad or wrong, or that the Palestinians have done anything. It's simply entirely based on the fact that the Palestinians are extremely failed as a culture, and the Jews of Israel are extremely successful as a culture. Well, if there's no difference, because you're not allowed to recognize differences, if there's no difference between Islam and Judaism, then the only possible explanation for the Palestinians' failure is that they were oppressed. And the only possible explanation for Israel's success is because they are the oppressors.
Well, you've given me a lot to think about in just that, but I want to ask you real quick, because we have a lot we want to try to get through. You have a new book that just came out. Magic Soup, Typing Monkeys and Horny Aliens from Outer Space, the patently absurd, wholly unsubstantiated, and extravagantly failed atheist origin myth. Talk to us about your new book.
Well, it's actually two parts, two things in one. The first part of it goes about explaining that there is no scientific basis for atheism. See, one of the things that I recognized along the way that led me to ultimately write this book is that the vast majority of atheists today, the woke, especially amongst the woke, have never given God's existence any thought. They have simply not only rejected the notion of God because it's unscientific, but they've been raised to despise those who embrace God because they've been told that religion is the cause of various wars and atrocities and oppressions and wrongdoing. Well, the first thing that I recognized is that the political left, whether it's political issues or whether it's religious issues, they never argue in the affirmative. That is, they never argue on behalf of what it is they believe. They only argue that those who don't agree with them have something wrong with them. You're a bigot, you're a homophobe, you're a xenophobe, you're brainwashed. There's something wrong with you. But there's a good reason that the atheists don't argue on behalf of atheism. In other words, they have no scientific explanation, and they don't even attempt to proffer one for how the universe came about, how it came from nothing. They don't even attempt to offer a scientific theory as to how the cosmos so perfectly fine-tuned themselves to allow for the existence of life, when that is in utter contradiction to the second law of thermodynamics. And the reality is, yes, belief in God is extra scientific. By definition, God is beyond our sciences. But so too is the only alternative to God extra scientific. So they get their followers to reject God because God isn't scientific, but they don't offer anything in its stead. So the first major part of this book is laying out what the atheist arguments are on behalf of a godless universe. And in fact, they are, I with hyperbole and with intentional humor, call it magic soup, typing monkeys and horny aliens from outer space. But the magic soup is the primordial ooze. The horny aliens from outer space, this one, the only explanation for how life began on Earth, the most deeply embraced, this I'm talking about not just by laymen, but by the leading atheistic quote unquote scientists like Richard Dawkins, is a thing called directed panspermia. The leading and only remaining theory that the leftists, that the godless have for how life began on Earth is that billions of years ago, aliens built a spaceship and planted the seeds of life on Earth. All right, so now that's patently absurd. That's unscientific. In fact, there's no science requires evidence. Science requires things on the left side of the ledger, evidence and laws and constants to lead to their conclusion. There is no evidence for horny aliens from outer space having impregnated the Earth. So what the left is really doing, because I keep conflating leftism with godlessness, but just as we speak of the religious right, we need to speak of the irreligious left, because it is a very big part of the leftists of the woke movement, right? And so what they are doing by embracing horny aliens from outer space is simply acknowledging that there is nothing on Earth that they have found in the past 10,000 years that can even begin to explain how life came from the insentient. And so it's Richard Dawkins, one of the leading spokesmodels for militant atheism, who said, given the failures of all terrestrial theories, directed panspermia must be taken seriously.
It's almost overwhelming to think that there's people in our society that think like this. Why do you believe the leftists have embraced atheism?
Well, look, atheism as a personal belief has been around for as long as belief in God has. But as part of a political movement, what I mean when I say militant atheism is a concerted political effort to outlaw belief across an entire society as part of a bigger political effort. So this militant atheism, this attempt to outlaw belief across a society, is fairly new in the modern world. It only first got intellectual credence when Karl Marx published the Communist Manifesto. Right? Godlessness wasn't the central ideology, but it was an essential part if they were going to institute their ideology. And since Marx, militant atheist ideologies have included Leninism, Stalinism, Hitlerism, Maoism, and now wokeism. And every single one of these militant atheist movements made the same promise to their followers or their potential followers. They said, if you will reject God and embrace us as gods, we will engineer a brand new, never before seen type of human being who will then usher in utopia. And so the Leninists, the Stalinists, the Maoists, the communists, they promised that if the people rejected God and embraced them as gods, they would engineer a human being who was wholly devoid of self-interest, of selfishness. They were going to engineer selfishness out of the population. And thus they would create a man, a human being, a worker who would give his all for society while asking only the bare minimum in return for himself. And that would usher in a worker's paradise. The Nazis promised that if you rejected God and you embraced the Nazis, they would engineer an entirely new type of human being who was devoid of human emotion and made decisions based entirely on calculus. They were Stoics who would not be dragged down by emotions like regret or guilt. And in doing so, they were going to create the Ubermensch, the superhuman, who would then, Hitler promised, would bring on the perfect world. Well, the woke promise that if you reject God and embrace them, They will engineer the perfect human being who is wholly devoid of hate. And in fact, they have done an outstanding job of engineering, of manufacturing successive generations of Americans and others in the West, but we're talking in America, who are in fact wholly devoid of hate. The problem is that love and hate is a single concept. You like up and down. You can't have one without the other. And so by engineering hate out of their followers, they've also engineered love out of their followers. They don't love God. They don't love country. They don't love each other. They don't love, and so because they don't hate, for example, go back to my earlier example, they don't hate what the Palestinians did to the Israelis. They don't love good because they don't hate evil. They don't love justice because they don't hate injustice. They don't love beauty because they don't hate ugliness. And the consequence of the elimination of both love and hate has left successive generations, right? This is not me giving you the statistics, giving you the numbers. This is the CDC. I mean, these are the official, that we are now living in successive generations with an epidemic of suicide, with an epidemic of mass random homicides, an epidemic of depression, an epidemic of loneliness, because the woke have succeeded in engineering successive generations that neither love nor hate. And there's, it's fun. John Lennon, when he put the militant atheist doctrine to music, that's all he did in the song Imagine, was take the atheist doctrine and put it to music. And he said that we will create this perfect world with nothing to kill or die for. And they did, in fact, create that world. But what Lenin and the woke and the militant atheists don't tell their victims is that a world with nothing to kill or die for is also a world with nothing to live for, which is why there's now an epidemic of suicide. And it's also a world with no reason not to kill, which is why there's an epidemic of mass random homicides.
So let me ask you something. What's the resolve here? What concerned Americans, they hear this, what you're saying. I'm sure they would agree to what you're saying. What do we do?
Well, look, my suggestion is everybody across the entire country should stop right now and go buy my book. Of course, I'm being a little bit facetious, but that I wrote this book for a purpose. And there, a fair question to ask is, why do we need another book making the case on God's behalf, making the case for a creator, when there's been tens of thousands of them? And partly I wrote this book in a style and in a manner that would be accessible to this new younger generation, because they're not so many of the previous books that make the case for a creator and do a great job of it, including Lee Strobel's A Case for the Creator.
Right.
They are often they often attempt to litigate the case. It's not. This book can be read as fun. It's funny. I used to be a stand-up comedian. I started out as a stand-up comedian. After that, I became a television writer, and I wrote Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher for 6 years. So there's humor and there's a twist, because litigating this case seems to me almost like trying to litigate the emperor's wearing clothes. Yeah. Once you begin to actually take the political left seriously, you've given them more credence than they deserve. The political left deserves no credence. They deserve ridicule. And so my book is fun to read, and hopefully that will keep the kids, because they know that they're being lied to. They know that there aren't 197 genders. They know that America isn't this evil, horrible, but they never hear the alternative. And when they do hear the alternative, it is often made in a way that's so strident that they turn it off. So this book was written to engage this latest generation or two or three by giving them both the arguments, but also some fun along the way.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. You know, the Barna Research Group, I'm sure you're familiar with Barna.com. They came out with a new survey that they did over, I think it was 27,000 teenagers across the world. And what they are now dubbing this next generation, which many of my audience would know as Gen Z or the last generation, they're calling this generation the open generation. This is the most open generation to the truth. And I believe much of that is because of what you said earlier. And I actually just preached on this recently, is that there's so much information being thrown at this generation, and they know they're being lied to, and they want to know the truth. So this book can help them get the truth. Evan, Sayet, how can they get a hold of this book? What's the best way?
Well, go straight to Amazon.com and just type in my last name, Sayet, and all of my books will come up. And this book, as it turns out, I didn't intend it when I began, but it's the third book in my trilogy. So it started with the Kindergarten of Eden, how the modern liberal thinks, went to the woke supremacy in Anti-Socialist Manifesto, and then this. And all of those are at Amazon.com. And everything Evan Sayet is at evansayet, Sayet.com.
Okay. Well, Mr. Sayet, thank you so much for writing these books. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to thank everybody that's tuned in. Go out, get his book. I think you're going to enjoy it. Also, I want to ask you once again, like this video, share it out with your friends, your family, your neighbors. Head on over to ourwatch.com, subscribe, and become one of our watchmen. We'd really appreciate that. That's all we have for right now. Until next time, we'll see you right here on Our Watch with Tim Thompson.